Everybody, welcome to the web mechanics workshop. This is about 7 usability problems scaring away prospects. We truly appreciate everybody taking the time out of their busy days to get to be here with us, and we'll get started in just a couple minutes, so stay tuned. While we're waiting, I wanted to take a quick poll of everyone in the audience, see what your biggest online marketing challenges are. So we'll run a few polls throughout the webinar, and this is a good way to get warmed up, get the conversation rolling. So here's the poll. It should appear on your screen at your convenience. Shoot us some answers. For those just joining us, we have a poll, quick poll on your screen. What are some of your biggest marketing challenges? Just a quick poll to get us rolling. To those just joining, welcome. You'll see a poll on your screen. We're going to get started in just a minute or two. Welcome to the webinar from Web Mechanics about 7 usability problems scaring away prospects. All right, those just joining, there's a quick poll on your screen. What are some of your biggest marketing challenges? I'm going to close the poll in just a moment, and we'll get rolling on this webinar. All right, here are the results of the quick poll. Question was, what are some of your biggest marketing challenges? The results, 60% of you would like to assess campaign performance, followed by 40% getting stakeholder buy-in. Surprisingly, none of you working with our marketing vendors. Followed by 30% prioritizing activities and 20% locating actionable data. All right, so once again, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the webinar about 7 usability problems, scaring away prospects. Appreciate you taking out the time to be with us today. We also have a special guest with us, Shelley Wetzel. She's the program director for EduWeb, a conference that focuses on the digital side of integrated marketing campaigns. So she's here with us to tell you a little bit about the conference and to offer a $100 discount off registration. Welcome, Shelley.
Thank you. Great to be here and to be a little bit of a start before your webinar today. Yes, the annual EduWeb Digital Summit is July 27th to 30th in the great city of Chicago, downtown. And we have a multi-day event for many in higher education, from marketing, covers marketing, social media, strategy, implementation, testing, all sorts of things that have to do with what you have to do back on your campus. Having been a director of web development at a university for 8 years, I tackled many subjects you have tackling right now, and the conference offers a variety of speakers from all realms of higher education, as well as we have pre- and post-conference workshops, of which Web Mechanics is delivering a post-conference workshop on Wednesday afternoon, and we also have a special master class on Thursday. So again, if you want to attend the conference, we're offering a special $100 discount. You would just contact Web Mechanics, and they have the discount code, and they'll give it to you for registration. And we've got some great speakers. One of our keynote speakers is a gentleman, Shri, whose last name, unfortunately, I cannot pronounce, but he's Chief Digital Officer at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, previously at Columbia University. Mark Greenfield from University of Buffalo is our Tuesday speaker. And Wednesday, our closing, is Andrew Carabella, VP of Marketing at Sprout Social, in case any of you use that. So come on out, come to Chicago, have a great time. We've got pub crawls and receptions, and we got a Tuesday reception at Howl at the Moon, sort of a piano jazz bar. So lots of fun things to do as well as learning. So I hope to see you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you, Shelley. Thanks for being with us today. So once again, welcome to the webinar. So today we're going to cover website usability problems that are frustrating your users and potentially killing your website's engagement. We'll talk about things that may be lowering the number of applications and inquiries that you receive online, and we'll also talk about things that are limiting user engagement. So my name is Walt from Web Mechanics, but today's presenter is Jarrett Flegel. He's a veteran digital marketing strategist that focuses on helping higher education institutions hit their goals. So before we begin, I just want to share some quick administrative notes. So you're welcome to ask questions at any point during the webinar. You should see in your GoToWebinar control panel the Questions tab. If you just click that, you can send a question through that. Or if you see the chat panel, you can send messages through there. And I'll be posting URLs of helpful links in that chat. And as we go through the webinar, we'll answer as many of your questions as we can, and we'll set aside some time at the end of the webinar for any additional questions as well. You can also click the little hand raise button if you want to grab our attention, and we'll address any questions at that time. After the webinar is over, here's what we'll send you. We'll send you the basic version of our usability checklist, and that'll be a Google spreadsheet. We'll also send you the slides from this presentation and a link to the recording of the webinar. So you should receive all of this in an email probably tomorrow morning at the latest. Okay, so with all that out of the way, I'm going to turn it over to Jarrett and we can get started.
Hi everyone, my name is Jarrett Flegel. First off, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm, as Walt mentioned, a digital strategist here at Web Mechanics, and we're largely a technical bunch here. Largely our focus is on helping schools improve sort of their websites and find what's holding them back through analytics. So whether it's something preventing them from showing up in the search engine results or uncovering little usability problems that are preventing users from completing your website's objectives. So we've been doing this kind of work for higher education institutions for a while, basically helping schools untangle the knots in their digital marketing plans, analyze what's working and what's not, and remove the roadblocks that are keeping prospective applicants from inquiring, applying, etc. And today, we're going to be talking about, as Walt mentioned, those little website usability problems that are frustrating users and killing your website's engagement. These are things that we've noticed across dozens of EDU websites, and we've noticed them pretty consistently across the board. And in addition, we're going to be covering some solutions. So if your website has an issue like this, we'll show you how to get it out of the way. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So our workshop today is going to be divided into 3 parts. So the first part, we're going to talk about the forms on your website. So by forms we mean application forms, request to visit forms, request information forms, contact forms, you name it. And the reason for this is because forms are an incredibly important place to focus your attention because they're the last thing standing between your admissions team and a prospect's contact information. So making your forms as easy to use as possible are vital to completing a visitor's website journey, so they're often a great place to focus your attention at first. So increasing form completions on your website. Next, we're going to talk about mobile, so mobile website usability. And this is critical for attracting not just the best young students to your school if you have an undergraduate program, but a lot of adult learners and graduates are also getting more and more mobile savvy. And the fact is more than 80% of prospects now try to visit schools, potential schools' website on phones and other mobile devices other than desktop. So having a complete, satisfying experience across all platforms is essential to making that user experience as seamless as possible. And lastly today, we're going to cover a smorgasbord of other little usability problems that may seem little, but they're actually having a big impact on your website's effectiveness. And these could be things like the speed of your website, not taking user feedback seriously, the consistency of the copy on your site, how consistent is your copy, how readable is your website, so website readability and things like that. And before we jump in here, I wanted to conduct another quick poll. And Walt's going to send that out to you guys to find out what kind of data collection systems you're using right now. These could be things like Google Analytics, HubSpot, and the like. So if you could just quickly answer that poll, look forward to seeing what you guys come up with. All right, so we're seeing a lot of people using website analytics like Google Analytics. We have about a third of you using surveys like Qualaroo, for instance, and some of you are even using marketing automation like HubSpot, Marketo, things like that. Okay, that's great. So definitely a lot on the website analytics side. So what I'd like to jump into now is thinking about the data on the site, because collecting visitor data is vital to improving your website. It shows you what's going on, what's working, and what's not. And that way, when you're able to look at that data, you can you're not wasting your time trying to break down a brick wall when there's a path that goes right around it. And sometimes you might be surprised by the results. Sometimes a page layout that made immediate sense to you might confuse your users. So it's good that you guys are using Google Analytics, and we're going to get into some other tools a little bit later that'll help you solve some of these usability problems. So let's jump right into website forms. So your website has a number of different objectives, and it caters to many different parties, right? Especially in higher education, you have students, current students, and faculty, right? And for them, your website serves as a hub for administrative information like school closings, and it also operates as kind of a portal for enrolling and managing classes, refilling meal cards, paying tuition, and things like that. For your alumni, they use your website to keep up to date with events that you have going on. Then hopefully they use it as a tool to engage with you and hopefully act as almost an extension of your recruitment team, right? And of course, you want to encourage donations to the website. So you want to engage alumni and ask them to give and help you develop and advance towards your mission. But especially for prospective students, your website is used by them to gather information about your programs and classes, apply for upcoming semesters, and ultimately contact people on your admissions team with questions and move through the admissions process. But no matter what your visitor is trying to accomplish on your site, odds are they're going to end up either submitting a form or picking up the phone to call someone at your institution. So managing your website, your number one goal should be to make these actions as easy as possible for the user. So to help, let's start at the contact point. So let's start with some little usability problems that might be plaguing your website's forms. But before we jump into that, one more quick poll. I wanted to ask you real quickly, how many different forms, approximately, you don't have to know off the top of your head, but how many different forms would you say you have on your website right now? All right, so it looks like we're sitting at the extremes here. On the one end, we have people who have maybe 1 to 5 different forms, and then we have the majority of people who have 16 plus different forms on the site. So, you know, with 16 plus different forms, that's a lot of opportunities to remove those little usability snags. Cool. So here are a couple of the problems we've noticed, and probably almost the number one problem we've noticed with higher education web forms is asking too much information. So why is this a problem? Obviously, you want to collect information from your users to get them, involved in the admissions process, especially if you're using forms to get prospective students to contact you. So the goal of a form is to collect the visitor's information so the next part of the enrollment or the admissions cycle can begin, right? A admissions counselor reaches out and contacts them. The problem is having too many fields discourages the users from investing the time necessary to submit this form. So if you look at this little form sample on my page, it's an example of a higher education web form. You can see it's a lot of fields, right? And you imagine the student, especially if they're young, but not necessarily, maybe they're a busy professional. They hit this form, they see all these fields, they're like, what are they going to say? They're going to say, ugh, I have to fill all this out? Now, there may be some people who are really bullish and really want to attend your institution, and they'll just barrel right through it. But a large percentage of people, this is where they're going to get stuck, right? So obviously, you want to collect information about your users, and you want to get that essential information. So how do you sort of work around this challenge? The number one thing you can do is use less than 6 fields per form. So in other words, only collecting the absolutely essential information to get that visitor or prospective student into the admissions process. So it's very tempting to ask for everything you can think of up front and try to collect that information and front load it to make it a little easier maybe on your admissions team. But the fact is you're going to have opportunities to collect that information down the road, right? And if possible, go even lower than 6 forms. So there was a study conducted by the company HubSpot, who some of you might be familiar with. They do marketing automation, or basically a marketing platform. But what they found was that reducing the number of form fields from 4 to 3 would bring a 50% improvement in conversion rate. In other words, the number of people who actually end up filling out that form. So being able to exercise some restraint by letting the admissions officers collect additional information not only makes it easier for the users to get to your admissions team, but also allows the admissions officers to start building that relationship. So by limiting the number of fields, you build trust with your user by not asking too much of them up front, so that they feel comfortable when they move to the admissions team and they start asking them questions because they know that that's sort of part of the process. Another thing you can do, sometimes you have a situation where you have to ask a lot of questions. One example might be an online application form, where you have a long series of questions that the user has to get through to apply to your school. So a simple solution for that is just to separate that form into multiple steps. So instead of having one daunting long form that the user looks at, kind of sighs, and then starts working through, you can actually break your longer forms into a multiple step form with a progress bar. So, step 1, fill out your name, phone, email. Step 2, what program are you interested in? Which campus do you want to go to? Step 3, maybe some final information. Done. And at each stage along that process, there's a little progress bar that allows the student to track their progress as they're going through that form. So they're kind of moving, it's kind of like a game, right? And they kind of have this sense of forward momentum, whereas if it's just long form, it's all up front at once and it's very daunting. So say you have 10, 15 fields the user has to fill out. Breaking it out into a multi-step form with a progress bar can make it a lot easier for that user to sort of ease through that form fill process. Finally, it's helpful to make it very clear which fields on your form are optional and which are required. Now, you've probably seen this on a lot of forms. A required field might have an asterisk, and that indicates that it must be filled out. But perhaps rare is to see, clearly delineated which fields are optional. And it's often surprising because it's not always intuitive for the user. They may not know which field is actually, they don't have to fill out at that time. So for example, you may have a program of interest field, but it's an optional field. They don't have to pick which program they're interested in when they complete that field, when they complete that form. But because it's not clearly noted by the form field, they may still think it's required, and they may abandon it at that point for whatever reason. So you want to clearly mark and differentiate those so that as the user is moving through those form fields, they know what they have to fill out and what they don't at every single step in the process. Awesome. Walt, do we have any questions from that section?
Anybody have any questions?
All right. Cool. So the second problem we see with a lot of forms on EDU websites is complicated or unclear form fields. So what you're looking at on my screen here is an example of form analytics, which basically gathers data on how users are interacting with forms on your site. And this is showing what's called form abandonment, which is pretty self-explanatory, on which of the fields are most of the users abandoning as they start filling out the form. So in this particular example, you'll notice there's a small, it's kind of a little hard to see on your screen, but there's a small abandonment rate on the first name field, sort of minimal rate on phone and email, but then there's this I am interested in field, which is basically a program of interest field. And there's a 46% drop-off rate on that field. And when you see something like this, it's pretty compelling, because what that means is that of 100 people who started filling out that form, 46% dropped off on this I am interested in field. So one of the reasons this drop-off can happen is because basically you never want a form to confuse or frustrate your prospects. And a single failed attempt to submit could be enough to drive a user off your site. They might come back, they might try to call, or they might go to a competitor or another school's website. But the fact that you frustrated them in that one particular instance already leaves kind of a sour impression in their mind, right? And if you build up enough of those sour impressions over time, it can work against the prospective student's perception of your school and their experience with it. So what can you do about this? You notice people are dropping off your form on a particular field. How can you resolve this? Well, as I mentioned above, similar to what I said earlier, just simplifying your forms by reducing the questions and making them multi-step can have a huge impact. So the less you ask of a user up front, the less frustrated they're going to be, right? Or if you make it easy for them or make it clear how long it's going to take them to complete it, then it's going to make it a lot easier for them to easily give over their information. Another thing you can do, though, is include help text for each form field, right? So help text is text that you can append to one of your form fields that explains it, right? So say a user comes across a field that they might not understand. So for example, you'll see this a lot on e-commerce forms where you have a security code that you have to fill out. And you'll see a little question mark, and you hover over it and it says, what's this? Well, that information allows the person to figure out what they have to put in there. Similarly, on forms on your website, there may be fields that you notice people are dropping off on. It may be that what they're being asked is a little unclear or requires further explanation. Adding a little bit of help text around that form field can make it that much easier for the user to say, oh, this is what I have to do, and it clarifies and allows them to move through the process. Another option is to simply reword confusing fields and drop-downs. For example, you may have the wording on one of your request information forms. We've seen this before. Might be major, declare your major or something like that. Well, A, that might feel like a binding decision to the user, and B, maybe the jargon declare isn't clear, especially if the person's an undergraduate and not really familiar with higher education institutions and working with them. So what you might want to do is test language like, the major I am interested in is, or my program of interest is, right? Humanize the language a little bit so that it's easier for the person to understand, okay, here's what's expected of me, and here's why I'm filling this field out. Finally, you want to eliminate any dependent or invisible fields. So these are fields, say you have a request information form and you pick a select your campus field, right? So if somebody selects their campus, great, I want to go to this campus. Then all of a sudden, all the programs for that campus pop down, and they have all these options on the form they didn't realize they had to complete before. So, right there, you've added an extra step in the way of the user completing their goal. So the less you do that, and the easier you make it for the user just to see what they see is what they get, then the less they have to be interrupted during the process of trying to do what you're asking them to do. So for example, to sort of give you guys an example here, this is an example from a client of ours, and when we noticed this 46% drop-off rate, we were a little, miffed. We said, well, it's not really hard. The user just has to pick a field on which program of interest they have and move on. But what we hypothesized upon reflection was that we found users probably felt they were making a binding decision by selecting their program. So they would choose a program, then they wouldn't be able to change it down the road. Now, of course, from the admissions perspective, this is kind of silly, right? Because especially if they're an undergraduate, they can wait even a couple years to choose their major. But we said, okay, let's set up a test. So we set up 2 variations of this page, right? The original page, same form, and then we set up a variation where we took this program of interest field and switched the element around a little bit. So there was an option, oddly enough, for the prospective student to choose not sure. So they were not sure at this time, but it was sitting all the way down at the bottom of a very long pick list, right? So it wasn't very pronounced. So what we did was we took that option up to the top of the pick list, so moved it all the way up to the top, put some dashes around it to accentuate it so it was very clear clearly differentiated from all the other options. And we humanized the language, right? So we changed the language to not sure question mark, choose this, so that as the user is moving through that form and they hit that field, they know instantly that they can choose that field and feel comfortable moving on, and they don't have to opt in to a particular program at that time. And the test ran for 2 weeks, and what we found was that the variation where we made that one little tweak to the form field increased form completions by 86%. And this was the main form this client had on their site. So you can imagine just little tweaks like this at the place where the user is giving their information can have a huge impact on your overall inquiry, application, and ultimately enrollment results. Cool. Any questions from the field on this one?
Anybody have any questions? Once again, you can click the questions tab in GoToMeeting and type in a question, or send us a chat if you have a question. There's also a little hand icon. You can click that to raise your hand.
All right. This leads us into the third problem we see with a lot of EDU websites, forms, and that's that the forms are just not mobile friendly. So I don't know if any of you have ever had the pleasure of trying to fill in a form that looks like this with tiny text and tiny radio buttons and tiny form fields on your mobile device, but needless to say, the experience can range anywhere from somewhat unpleasant to completely impossible. So by not at least optimizing your forms on your site for mobile usability, you're potentially preventing would-be prospects from submitting their information, and often a large number depending on how many of your visitors are coming from mobile. So what can you do about that? That actually segues nicely into our next topic, which is mobile usability, right? So we want to make our forms and entire website mobile friendly. So how do we do that? So to kind of set the stage, we can safely say that digital media has gone mobile at this point. There's plenty of evidence supporting this. For example, the daily number of Google searches from mobile devices officially outnumbers Google searches from desktop computers. So in other words, more people are Googling on their mobile phones than on their laptops, for example. Also, 71% of high school graduates use their mobile phone to research a school, right? And even for the parents, more than 45% of parents will look at a college website on a mobile device. So having that experience, mobile experience, be as seamless as possible gets more and more important every single day. In addition, you all may have heard of Google's April 21st mobile update. You may have heard the term mobile-geddon, right? And it made the importance of usability on mobile abundantly clear. What happened was, on that day, 50% of non-mobile friendly URLs lost rankings in the search engines, right? So before we move into what makes a mobile website friendly, I'd actually like to take another quick poll and see how many of your schools have a mobile website or a mobile responsive website. All right, so it looks like we're about 50-50. About 50% have a responsive website currently in place, and 50% do not currently have a mobile website. And there are a few that are uncertain what type of mobile website you guys currently have, which is fine because we're going to actually cover that right now. So what is mobile usability? What does mobile friendly mean? So if you ask Google, who's really taking charge and clearly demanding that our sites become mobile friendly with all these updates that they're putting out, what does that mean? Well, the first thing it means is that you have a view area, or what's called a viewport, that adjusts to the screen size. So what you see on a desktop can flexibly adapt to any screen size, from the biggest tablet screen to the largest desktop screen, all the way down to the smallest mobile device. And it'll sort of contort itself very naturally and adjust according to the shape of the screen. Second portion of a usable site is easy-to-touch elements. So, for example, buttons that are well-spaced and sized for human fingers, and also form fields that are easy to click on, links that are easy to click on, things like that. So you want on your mobile device to have elements that are very easy to touch and click on. Finally, you want to make sure that the fonts scale for easier reading on smaller screens. So in that last image I showed you guys with the tiny font and tiny screens, as you can imagine, that's not really very mobile friendly. You want the fonts to actually blow up on the smaller screen so that they're larger and makes it easier for the user to read through versus having to squint their phone or having to zoom in with their fingers to bring the screen up to size. So, being that this is what we need to have a mobile-friendly website, let's look at some of the options that are available. So, the first option, and the one that we really recommend, is responsive design, right? So, this is the option that's suggested by Google, and for a couple reasons. One of the pros of a responsive design site is that it's easy to maintain, right? So, instead of having multiple different versions of your website, or different, a website for mobile or a website for desktop, you have one website that scales to all different devices. So you have one set of pages for all devices. So it becomes very easy to you just have to maintain one website, and you don't have to jump between different types of sites. This is also good for SEO, actually. So there are no conflicts between mobile and non-mobile pages competing in the search engines. So you can have just one page, one definitive canonical page throughout. Perhaps a downside to responsive is that it can be expensive to implement. You will need an advanced developer or development team to help implement a responsive solution for your site. So it's important to, if you're looking to go responsive, understand what the budget is and understand what the technical requirements are that you need, and be able to plan accordingly in terms of budget and otherwise. The second option you have for making your website mobile friendly is called dynamic serving. So what that means is that your website is going to serve up different versions of the site based on what type of device the user comes from. So if they come from a desktop, they'll get the desktop version of the website. If they come from a mobile device, they'll get the mobile version of the website. So this is a fairly expensive solution. It's probably best for websites that are primarily visited by desktop computers. So in other words, if 90 to 95% of your visitors come from desktop, then dynamic serving might be a good solution for you. One of the pros of dynamic serving is that it allows for a unique mobile and desktop content. So if you have a reason to have different sort of content strategies on mobile versus desktop, this might be a good opportunity to do that. And it would also be good for SEO, assuming that you're creating unique content on each platform. One of the major downsides of dynamic serving is that it is very high maintenance. So you basically have two different versions of the website you have to upkeep, and they're high cost of implementation. This is even more expensive than creating a responsive design site. And finally, having a dynamic serving site can actually slow down your load times. And the reason for that is because whenever somebody visits your site, the server has to figure out which variation of your site to serve up to the user, right? So that adds a lot of lag time to actually delivering the content of the site, which can be very frustrating for your users. So if you have a lot of users on mobile, especially mobile devices, maybe they're a bit slower than desktops, it might be preferable to avoid dynamic serving. But again, if most of your visitors are coming from desktops, it might be a good option to consider. Finally, we have a dedicated site. So what this means is you have a version of your site that's just for desktop, and then you have a separate website. So perhaps you have www.yourschool.edu, and then you have m. for mobile, right? m.yourschool.edu, which is a subdomain, in other words, a domain within your primary domain of your website that takes them, it's an entirely separate website essentially, right? And it's probably the cheapest solution for creating a mobile-friendly website. So one of the pros of this is that it's pretty cheap to build, and because they're separate websites, the load times are pretty fast, right? So the load time of your mobile site is going to be separate from the load time of your main website because they're completely separate from each other. But if you have two different versions of your website, it can be pretty bad for SEO because you'll have your mobile version and your desktop version potentially conflicting with each other. And obviously, because you have two different websites now, this can be very expensive to maintain, not just in terms of cost, but also in terms of time and resources. And investing, updating content on both, it can become a bit of a hassle. So something to keep in mind for that option as well. Cool. Do you guys have any questions about mobile friendliness or mobile usability for your site before we move on?
Feel free to post questions anytime. Hopefully you can see the chat window. I've posted some helpful links there. So we have a question from Damana. It's, so what would be your recommendation for the best solution to be mobile friendly?
Cool.
Ours and Google's, right?
Yeah. So as I kind of went over, it depends on your website and also on your audience. So as I mentioned earlier, if you have mostly desktop users, then dynamic serving might be very valuable for you. But what we found is in the vast majority of cases, responsive design is the way to go because it's lower cost to maintain over time, and it's a lot simpler. You just have to manage one website. So if you have the option, I would say make a mobile responsive design. That would be our best recommendation.
We have another question. You mentioned expensive costs for all three solutions. What are typical startup costs for responsive design?
That's a great question. So that's going to vary a lot. Cost is going to depend on a few factors. It's going to depend on the technical aspects of your website. So what is your website built on? What systems is it built on, and what work is needed to get it to where it needs to be. It also depends on the size of your website. How many pages do you have? How many pages are you making responsive? These are all things that can kind of factor into the mix of actual costs. As far as hard costs, a little tricky to quote off the top of the head. I think most developers and designers would tell you likewise. It's something that you'll want to consult with a few firms about and price out different rates. And in the end, ultimately, you don't want to just go for price. We would recommend you go for a firm that not just understands your website, but also understands your business needs or the needs of your institution, right? And if you can find that nice match that's within your budget and is a firm that you feel comfortable working with, is professional, and is willing to get down and understand what you need to be successful, then I would recommend moving forward with them.
And I can add to that, Christine. I do believe that in addition to us recommending a responsive solution, I think that in most cases that will not only be the best solution for many reasons, but potentially the cheapest if you instead do a dynamic or a completely different website as your mobile solution. Then you're talking about designing and developing an entirely separate site as opposed to adding on to your existing site to build in the responsive aspect. So it's a key difference there.
All right. Cool. So now that we've covered a couple of the biggest areas of opportunity for most schools, we'll quickly cover a couple other ways you can improve your website's usability. Some of these might seem small, or you may have considered them, you might not have, but they can have a pretty substantial impact on the results of your website. So the first issue is speed, right? So website speed can have a huge impact on the usability and the overall user's experience on your site. So slow websites are a huge cause of abandonment. So statistics show that over 40% of people abandon a website that takes more than 3 seconds to load. So in other words, if every single page on your website takes more than 3 seconds to load, on average, you're getting 40% of visitors to abandon every single page, right? So the slower your website is, the more cumulatively you're losing visitors on your site. But it's not just important for human users, it's also important for robots. So Google and other search engines are incredibly focused on website speed to the extent that they'll favor in their index websites that have a higher page speed because they're looking at all those usability factors, and they want to see sites that deliver an excellent user experience, and that's what they want to serve to their users. So we're going to send out another quick poll, and I just want to find out how many of you are actually prioritizing projects that improve your website's load times. If any of you have done anything recently to improve your website speed. Okay, so again, we're about 50-50. 50% have not done any page speed optimization. 50% of you have, either within the past 6 months or the last 2 years. Okay, great. So here are a couple things you can actually do to improve page performance. The first thing you want to do, I'll touch on, is there's a tool called Page Speed Tools that's provided by Google. So if you look at Google Page Speed Tools, you'll see it on my screen. It'll actually give you a grade based on what your page's performance is, and it'll give you some guidance from there, right? And it'll give you, examples like this: optimize images, leverage browser caching. So what does all that mean? So optimizing images means making sure that you do what's called compressing your images before uploading them to your website. So often when people upload images, they upload the largest file size that they get originally with the image, and that can be many, many, many megabytes, right? So people upload gigantic images to their site that then have to be slowly downloaded by smartphones, desktops, and other devices, and that can take a lot of time on the user's end and a lot of bandwidth. So instead, what you can do is actually create a compressed version of the image and upload it to the site and cut down on the size of the file significantly, so it results in significantly less total stuff that the user has to upload when they load your site. So that alone can have a huge impact on your site speed. Along with that, what can be effective is to cache what you can. So what does that mean? So repeat visits are obviously common among prospective students. So it's smart to do what's called storing your website's images, CSS, which is the visual code of a website, and Java in the browser's cache. And what that does is when that user is cached, they return to your website, those return visits actually require far less loading on their end. So they can just have your cached version of your site served up, and they don't have to reload the pages that they've seen before every single time. So that makes their return experience even better than their first experience. So that can be very, very powerful. Finally, I want to mention CMS, or Content Management System. Some of you might be familiar with the term. It's what you use, the system you use to manage the content on your website, basically. Outdated CMSs are more than just a security vulnerability. So they can actually be a ball and chain wrapped around your website's ankles, really slowing them to a standstill. So what you want to do is, if you have a modern CMS but it's not updated, go to your IT team, go to your web developer, and say, hey, let's check. Is our CMS up to date? Are we in the latest version? If yes, great. If no, what can we do to get that updated? If you're on a CMS that does not update or is just outdated by nature and isn't receiving any updates to keep up with the changes on the web, then it might be a time to consider migrating to a new CMS. So again, that's something to keep in mind. A couple other tips here. Avoid useless data collection. So there can be, on websites, you often may find there are a lot of plugins that sort of come preset and other data collection platforms that can conflict or cause a user's browser to send an unnecessary amount of requests, slowing their performance or their experience down to a crawl. So you're going to want to talk with your IT team or your development team and see if there are any tools that are on the site that just aren't needed and get rid of those. Finally, you want to use CSS efficiently. So CSS is basically the code that serves up the visual experience of your website. But often what you find is that there's unused or extra CSS left over in a lot of website code. So you want to go to your developer and say, hey, can we clean this up or remove it? Because the more CSS you have, the more it bogs the user's experience down. One thing to be careful of here, if you have too little CSS, it'll be hard to create a strong user experience. So it's about finding that right balance of code that elegantly provides the best experience possible for your user. Any questions on site speed before we move on? Awesome. Cool. So another huge opportunity that we've noticed with a lot of schools is collecting user feedback. So listening to your users is probably one of the simplest ways to improve your website's usability. After all, they're the ones that are using it, and they're the ones that you need to cater to. So, but what we find is most websites don't collect user feedback, or they kind of ineffectively collect user feedback. For example, we see some schools sending out like 10-minute surveys with dozens of fields, and most audiences aren't really going to engage with that. You know, it's a little daunting, and they probably don't want to fill it all out. But I wanted to send out a quick poll and just see how many of you guys are currently actively soliciting feedback from your users. All right, and the vast majority say no. Okay, cool. So this is a really untapped opportunity for you guys. So how do you solicit feedback from your users? Well, the first thing you can do, and just to touch on this real quick, there are a lot of tools you can use to accomplish this. One is called Qualaroo, and just a simple survey tool you can use. Another one is called Qualtrics. You might have heard of that one as well. I believe that one's a little more high-end enterprise, but both are very good options. The first thing you can do to make feedback easy is use some of the suggestions we already talked about with forms. For example, not asking so many questions. So what you can do instead is first ask people how their experience with the website was, and limit the submission choice between, you could do 3 smiley faces. So there are ways to do this, right? You could have a happy face, a face looking kind of uncertain, and a face with a big frown. And all it takes the user is a click of a button, you know, and they recognize the face and how it makes them feel, and they'll match up with that face, and it'll instantly submit that feedback, right? And once that smiley face is submitted, you can ask a follow-up question, something like, well, we're sorry you feel uncertain about our website. What could have made your experience even better? And you have to understand that only a very small percentage of your users are actually going to complete this, but the ones that do are users that are frustrated with the experience on your site and want to tell you what's keeping them from completing that desired action. Often it's the action that you want them to take, right? So, for example, you may have a situation where someone's filling out a form, and what modern survey technology allows you to do is have a little form pop up on the lower right-hand corner of the screen, for instance, as the user is disengaging with your website. So as they're moving their cursor up to the upper left-hand side of the screen, or just up to the top to leave. And you can catch them and say, hey, how's your experience with our site? So instead of interrupting them as they're moving through the website, you can actually catch them before they leave and let them tell you why they're frustrated. And over time, you collect 10, 20, 30 responses, and trends start to emerge between that. And it becomes a gold mine for telling you exactly where users are getting frustrated and completing that next step. And it gives you plenty of fodder to learn how to remove and get those barriers out of the way. Any questions about website feedback? A couple other notes here. Make sure you're consistently requesting feedback. So it's not just about asking once, but about constantly getting the feedback. So say you improve your website based on the feedback you receive, it's important to then ask again or ask a new set of users. So always be soliciting feedback and always try to look at how you can get better with your website and get that information from the users who are experiencing the website in real time. And one option you can use is even to incentivize feedback submissions. So you might say, hey, we'll give you, you could bring people on and say, hey, enter to win a $50 Amazon gift card, simply fill out this quick survey, and we'll be eternally grateful, right? So those things alone can make a huge impact on getting more of those people that are visiting your site to provide that feedback that you need.
Did you have any other services other than Qualaroo or Qualtrics to recommend? Are those the main ones?
Those are a couple off the top of my head. There are a lot of different survey tools that are available. Honestly, those are the ones I always give out because I know them and I know they work pretty well. But there are a lot of tools you can use. For example, we use a custom suite we've put together in Web Mechanics that includes a survey tool as well. So you might find that there are some tools that also have a user survey element as part of the overall package. But the two products I mentioned are focused specifically on delivering powerful user surveys. Okay, cool. And in addition to the usability challenges we just went over, there are some other usability opportunities that aren't as obvious or clear-cut as the ones we discussed. For example, website readability. So when a person visits your website, are they being served a sort of block of text with jargon, like huge paragraphs of information, or do they get headlines and paragraphs that are no more than 2 to 3 lines long and bullet points? So in other words, how scannable is every single page so users can quickly find the information they need? Because as much as we like to believe our content is the best in the world, the fact is most users these days, especially on the web, skim. They look for the information they want and then they move on. And if they can't really dig that information out of your content, then it's going to be difficult for them to engage with it. Navigation consistency. Say someone visits your home page and has a certain navigation bar that they can navigate and they get used to it, and then they move to a different page of your site and the navigation totally changes. So all of a sudden they're in this new country basically and they have to find their way around. Well, that's going to make it hard for them to get back where they were if they need to, and also to continually and easily find the things they need. So as much as possible, you want to make sure that your entire website has a consistent navigation experience so that they're not constantly trying to refigure out where they are and think about what they have to do on the site. So overall, what all these things accumulate to is you want to observe your users' behavior and then modify your site according to what people want out of the site. And the best way to find out for sure what your users want is to test iterations of your site. So it used to be that testing a website was a very difficult thing to do. There were a lot of technical challenges involved. You had to create a whole other version of a web page, and then you had all these other very antiquated softwares. You had Engage to set up a test, and often it was hard to track the results. But modern testing software makes split testing incredibly easy. So say you identify a usability problem on your site, right? All you have to do is upload a tool, click a couple of buttons to vary an element or layout on the page, and you can run a test. You can literally be up and running with a test in as little as 15 minutes these days. There are tools, to give you a couple examples, Optimizely is one that's pretty effective for a lot of institutions. Visual Website Optimizer is another one to check out. And there are a couple of other options out there, but the main takeaway is that nowadays what you can do is you can introduce a change to your website, even your homepage, and test that change in a controlled environment with a small number of users. So you don't have to test. If you think a change is going to have significant impact one way or the other, you don't have to test on all your users. You can take a small segment of the percentage of visitors that visit a given page on your site and test with them. And when you found something that creates a statistically significant improvement, then you can implement it for everyone else. So you can test either a small percentage of users, or you can test a certain traffic source even. For example, you only want to test on visitors that come from a paid search channel. You can do that now. So for all these little usability issues that come up, testing and testing and testing and testing again is the way to not just figure out what's wrong, but create incremental gains over time that have a positive benefit on all of your website marketing. So to wrap up real quick here, before we jump into Q&A, I wanted to give you guys a quick example of what this can look like when you start testing these little usability issues on your site. So for example, say, just for the sake of argument, you have 10,000 visitors coming to your website in a given month today, and you're spending $15,000 a month on average to get them there, right? And say of those 10,000 visitors, 2% of them convert, whether that means for you filling out a request for information form, scheduling a campus visit, completing an online application, things like that, right? So your total conversions or total action completions would be 200 per month, and you'd be paying $75 per conversion or per desired action. If you were to iteratively test and experience a 25% lift in the number of visitors who actually get through that process, you would experience your conversion rate would move to 2.5%. You'd be getting 250 conversions per month, and your cost per conversion would be 60. So you're starting to see how what you have kind of two options when deciding how to get more of those conversions in the door. You could double your ad spend, right? Double the investment in your website, and maybe hit that number, or you could iteratively test your website using the most strategic tests possible, and over time see the same gain with incremental or little or no increase in the marketing dollars you're spending. So this is powerful stuff. I hear from a lot of schools that they want to increase their traffic and they want to get more visitors and more prospective students to the site, but often what we find is that the visitors are already there. It's just about getting them through the funnel, getting them through the process. And finding these usability opportunities and iteratively testing and improving the percentage of people that actually get into your admissions funnel from a prospective student perspective is a great way to do this. With that, I wanted to wrap and thank you guys for joining us today. Obviously, this is something that we're passionate about. We work with a lot of schools to help improve their analytics, to help improve their measurement, and help them iteratively improve their results for their website. If this is something that's interesting for you or something that you think you could benefit from getting some professional help with, check us out at cro4edu.com. It talks all about what we do in conversion rate optimization and usability testing. And if you're interested, we can obviously only take on a few clients at a time, but you can fill out the form on the site, and we'd be happy to have somebody reach out and see how we could help. And with that, I wanted to thank you guys again, and let's move into some Q&A.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions for us, now's the time. Go ahead and type them in. either the chat window or the question tab of your GoToWebinar panel. Hopefully you could see my chats. I sent out some URLs as Jarrett was mentioning some services and other helpful resources. If you couldn't see them in the chat, you'll see them when we send you the presentation. And while you're thinking of those questions, I just want to remind you we have a discount. We heard from Shelley Wetzel at the beginning of the webinar, and we have a discount for the EduWeb Digital Summit in Chicago. It's going to take place July 27th through July 30th, and it will focus on the digital side of integrated marketing campaigns. The discount we're offering is $100 off registration. That's a pretty good deal. You just have to use the promo code WebMechDisc. That's WEBMECHDISC, WebMechDisc. Once again, that's the EduWeb Digital Summit this July. No questions? No usability problems? We're here to help.
I also like to hear from you guys. I think you guys are able to chat as well. If you could just chat me one tip or one insight you found useful about this, or even one thing that could have made this even more valuable for you guys, feel free to pop that in the chat window. Would love to hear from you about that.
Never thought about asking for feedback on the site.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rock, that's a great insight, and it's funny because it's kind of sitting right under your nose, right? The users are right there. Often a lot of schools will do external surveys, or they'll bring people in to an office or into a lab and have them interact with the website. But you can also just ask them right on the site, right while they're in the thick of it. So it's pretty cool what you can do these days with just quickly getting the feedback you want and asking a series of questions to do that. And yeah, it's pretty neat. All right, guys. Well, if there are no further questions, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Like we said, we're going to have the goodies for you guys in your inbox. Should be heading your way tomorrow at the latest. And yeah, thanks so much again. If you have any questions, feel free to reach back out. If you're interested in learning more about what we do, again, check out cro4edu.com and just fill out that form, and we can reach out and be in touch. All right. Thank you, guys.